there's a way that like my parents or my mom or the women in my family always taught me to like dress and like look, and it's not necessarily for other people anymore, right? It's for me, right? It's like, how do you feel good? You're gonna feel really good walking into that room when your hair is done and when you look good and when you dress nice, right?
Okay, well, this is a Upper Middlebrow digression episode. We're joined once again by Arionne Nettles. Arionne Nettles is a lecturer and director of audio journalism programming at Northwestern University's Medill School. Arionne was recently the deputy editor at the nonprofit civic media organization City Bureau and worked as a digital producer at WBEZ, where she ran the daily digital desk and occasionally reported for Curious City, which is how we got to know each other well in those days. That was a lot of fun. And we have to acknowledge that this is a sad week that we're doing this interview because we got the news that some of our friends and former coworkers were laid off, and a lot of podcasts were canceled. The future of Curious City itself is hard to make sense of. I think it's going to continue, but maybe not as a podcast in the time being. I've been angry and frustrated and emotionally raw and distracted for the last several days.
Yeah, it's really it's confusing on a lot of levels. And yeah, like emotionally, it's just really heartbreaking because when you physically see people put so much time and effort, like even if it wasn't us, like you see people put all this time and effort into the work, it feels like all of that is just being erased. So it's like people before us, people after us, like so much work and time and has been put to build up these things. People always ask about like, well, what does it take to get a hit podcast, right? It's a lot of sweat. And sometimes it also is a lot of like the work of people who did podcasts before you, who may not have had big hit podcasts too, right? Like it's just a lot that goes into it. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of effort. Sometimes a lot of investment. But the biggest thing is that it's a lot of time. And so to see time kind of like wiped away is just a sad thing. Because a lot of us do this for love. Like this is not the type of work you just get rich on. You do this because you really love it, and when you get that final product, like it's something that you're just extremely proud of.
It's like you're saying, how much work is it to make a hit podcast? It's like, how much work is it to make a not a hit but just respectful audience? Like you know, the kind of audiences that say Curious City had. Not huge, but in the context of a city like Chicago or Nerdette or some of the other series that WBEZ ran over the years. And I saw those numbers for years, and I'm not really supposed to talk about them, but it's like every week they go up a little bit, right? It's like you're building audience like one listener at a time for 7 or 8 years.
And so like, let's say, you know, so they go up a little bit every week, but like, every week to do that new Curious City podcast episode, we both know that it probably took months to do that episode. So like it's months of work on that one episode, and then you go up a little bit, right? So it's like that's so much time, that's so much effort, and it's okay because we love it, but it's just sad when it's not appreciated.
Yeah, and it you know, I think a great thing about that show is that because we were sourcing questions from the listeners, a lot of people in Chicago got to ask about something that was specific to their experience. You know, it's like, what about the thing that I see? Or why don't we have art in the viaducts that are on my part of Chicago? You know, I'm up here in Rogers Park and they've got this great art. Why don't we have it, you know, in South Shore or Inglewood? Or because Chicago is so big and so spread out, you can live your life in that city and there are places you'll never go. Or maybe you drive through one time. And so then I think when you have WBEZ kind of coming to your place and saying like, oh, we're going to talk about whatever it is, the particular history here, or the post office mural there, or the sub shop in Bronzeville with the gym shoe, you know, or whatever it might be. I think it's really meaningful that the news gathering organization pays attention to your part of the city for a few minutes there, you know, on the radio. And that might engage you, you know, that might bring you in, that might make you more inclined to pay attention to the service. And I don't know, I'm still making sense of it. And, you know, for people who listen to this show, this is the podcast where I was the producer, podcast and radio show where I was the producer as my full-time job for 5 or 6 years, and then stayed involved with for another 2 or 3 years. And how Arionne and I met, you know, we probably met prior to your working on Curious City by a few months, but really it was.
That's how we got closer.
Yeah. And worked on some really.
Yeah, it's a close process, right? Like I cried at your desk. Right?
I know. Yeah. Yeah, and we had some great, we had some good laughs too, and learned some things, and well, this is not what we're here to talk about, although it relates, because
it does relate.
I think that from what I can tell, you have used your work as a reporter for various outlets over years as a kind of starting point, it seems like, for this book that we're going to talk about. So let me just finish my introduction, which is to say, we're here to talk about Arionne's new book, We Are the Culture, Black Chicago's Influence on Everything, which is coming out very, very soon. And in fact, by the time you hear this, it may very well be out. But first, I think we asked you to prepare a recommendation for Upper Middlebrow listeners based on some other things. So have you done that? Are you ready with a recommendation?
Yes. So I know that my charge, because a lot of Upper Middlebrow listeners have been listening to some amazing or reading some amazing sci-fi books. And so I just had to talk about my favorite sci-fi book of all time, and it's called The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. And I have read this several times. I'm like holding it in my hand to make sure that I like do right by it while I'm talking about it. But the thing that I love about this book is that I think I went into it not really understanding or kind of not really knowing what I was going to get out of it. I just assumed that it was going to be kind of something that I maybe could not relate my own life to. And it was the complete opposite. And basically, not to spoil it, but the overall premise is that there are all these worlds, and you cannot travel to another world if the you of that world is still alive, because it would the thought is that it might kill you. So they're thinking maybe we can't have two yous on the same world. Like it'll disrupt some stuff.
So there's like millions of Jesse Dukes in different worlds.
There's a Jesse Duke on every world, right? And this came out just like a little bit right before the Marvel really died into the multiverse, really confirmed it with the
Spider-Verse and Doctor Strange multiverse.
Exactly. It was kind of when they were hinting, when Marvel fans was like, I think this hints that there really is a multiverse, right? But this book came out like right before that. And so, but it's that idea of the multiverse, except that the difference is that you're not really supposed to be able to go through different multiverses and travel, because if it's a you on a different planet.
It would be like another Earth, right? Like another version of Earth. It's not like a place you could get to in a spaceship, even if you had a really good spaceship.
Exactly. So this girl, she is able to go to a lot of different versions of Earth because she's pretty much dead on most of them because she grew up like low income, poor, had all these things happen to her where on a lot of these Earths, and actually they do call them like Earth this, Earth number this, if I'm remembering correctly. And because of that, she, died as a kid or like, had all these things where she just didn't make it to a certain age. And so because of that, she is able to kind of be like this traveler, like this adventurer. But it kind of like made me think about like the world that we have, right? Like how it just depends on like it's not like some of us, you're just born into what you're born into. And it's like literally on page 1, because like it'll start and you're saying like on this earth number 197 I died at 3 months old, and so you're like, wait, what? Huh? What's going on, right? And so you're kind of like in it. And so that was kind of my, I think, really introduction to how deep sci-fi could be, because I think there is often an idea that like sci-fi is frivolous or, oh, it's just fun. And I'm like, no, like there's some good themes up in this book. So
it's
like,
about, I mean, if it's done well, it's about us, right? And
exactly.
it's using fiction as a kind of vehicle for metaphor that allows us to look at some aspect of our own life, right? And like you and I can both, I will say, I have a fairly privileged background, and the chances are that most me's probably would be alive, and well on an alternative. Some of them would have gotten hit by a bus or something like that, or I don't know, maybe I was extremely lucky. Maybe I avoided some catastrophe that killed 90% of the Jesse Dukes in the other multiverses, but that, the character, both because of her, I believe, racial identity, but also because of poverty, that's the reason. That's the reason that the odds are against her surviving. The fact that this version of her has survived, she can then travel to the other worlds and sort of see alternative versions of what her life would have been like. And of course, it helps us think about how much those circumstances of our birth and of our class and of our race and of our privilege both contribute to the lives that we have, going forward, and how unfair that can be, because it's so disparate for some people.
Yeah. And so I feel like this is just like a really good book for like the wide spectrum. So whether or not you are new to sci-fi and you're like, hey, I really want to get into sci-fi, but the stuff I picked up before was just too hard. Because I have sometimes picked up some sci-fi books and they were just really heavy and difficult for me to get through. Like, maybe I tried the audiobook and I was like, I need to read this because I'm missing stuff. I'm going too fast through it. Like, I need to kind of look at it. Like, there's just certain things that are just like really heavy and it's a lot. Like The Water Dancer was like that. I know that's not technically sci-fi, but there is I had first got the audiobook because Joe Morton from Scandal narrates it, and I just love his voice, and so I wanted to listen, but it's just really tough because there's so many metaphors, because it's like magical and but we're talking about like slavery, and there's just a lot going on, and I'm trying not to miss these things and I'm getting lost. So I'm like, okay, I need to pick up the actual book. Maybe I should listen to the audiobook while I'm reading the regular book if I just want to hear his voice, but I couldn't do the audiobook alone because it was just like really difficult for me. It was a heavier, denser
Yeah.
text. But this is not a dense text. This is very clear. She's going to tell you exactly what these she's going to say, like, no, I died on all these things, and that is why I can travel to them, like I can travel to these earths. So it's like just it's made very clear for you.
Yeah.
But also I read it as part of, actually a second time I read it as part of the Nerdette Book Club. And when I did that, I was reading it with a lot of people who were really into sci-fi, and I feel like we're just like sci-fi experts compared to me, who I read, like, I feel like I read some sci-fi, right, but I'm like not an expert, and they also loved it. So I feel like this is a really good wide-ranging book for people, and it has a lot of action in it too, so it's really plot heavy, so you won't get bored. I know that's a lot of things too that people who again, I hear that I have friends who are not necessarily, they're not like me. They won't just pick up a book and read it in a couple of days.
But it's like an adventure story, right? Like
exactly. This is
people
an adventure
are dying
story.
And she's trying to solve a mystery and her life's it's exciting too,
it's exciting. There's so much. There's a little bit of love in there. So it got something for everybody. And so I think this is just a really good option.
Will you give me the name and author again?
Yes. The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson.
And I'll also just note that this was a recommendation that our friend Susie Ahn also sent us like a year ago too. And I have started reading it. I didn't actually finish it. And so now, and I feel like it's a good summer read, and we're coming up on summer. So I feel like now that both of you have said it, I just got to do it. I didn't not finish it because it was bad. I just was doing a lot of other things at that particular time, and I wanted my full attention. I want to give you a recommendation back based on everything you just said, and maybe you've already read it.
Please.
Have you ever read Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness?
No, but I'm going to now.
So it's from, I want to say 1968 or 1969.
Okay.
Ursula Le Guin, I think, died recently. I gotta double check that. Either she's very, very old, or she died recently. And I think a lot of people are rediscovering it. And this is another one of those books where it's like, if you don't think you like science fiction, you might actually like this book. And so it's told from the perspective of a black man from Earth who goes to another planet to try to recruit that planet into kind of like the United Nations, like something like that. Like, it's kind of like, they call it the Ecumen, but it's like a group of kind of planets that bond together for mutual defense and trade and learning and to share science and that kind of thing. But on this planet that he goes to, people don't have biological sex except for 4 or 5 days a month. And so for 4 or 5 days a month, they develop sex organs and they kind of take a break, and that's where the sex and the procreation happens. And if they're married, sometimes they become male, sometimes they become female, but most of the time they don't have biological sex. And a lot of it is this man is having a really hard time relating to people because he knows how to relate to a man or a woman, but how does he relate to somebody who's neither a man nor a woman? And he has to kind of learn about this planet's society in order to be able to communicate kind of effectively with them. But there's also kind of like action adventure and a survival story and, some intrigue and stuff like that, and some really powerful stuff. But today, like, this was written in 1969, really even like at the very beginning of what became the gay rights movement, with Stonewall and stuff like that. And the idea of trans identity and non-binary identity was not very mainstream, in the 1960s. And it feels really, really prescient. And it feels like it's a book that's kind of similar to The Space Between Worlds. It's using this adventure story to make us look at some aspect of our life and our society in a new way. So, and I just think it's a really powerful read. So that's my recommendation back to you.
I like it. So I will say that I was going to also recommend another book. And I won't go too deep into it, but I just have one warning about this book, is that this is like the heavier version of The Space Between Worlds.
Okay.
And it's by an author named Tochi Onyebuchi. And a lot of people like know him from his book Riot Baby, but I have not yet read that. I read first Goliath, that came out in 2022. Riot Baby came out in 2020. But Goliath, which I think he wrote during the pandemic, is really about the earth has become inhabitable. And people who have money have moved to like they've left it because they got money. They ain't got to stay here no more. Or like now they've come back to gentrify earth. Like they have the money to like create like a ways to breathe.
Castle. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes, they have like ways to like create like little bubbles to breathe in and all that good stuff. Where there's just like a lot of poor people who are like struggling and like strung out on drugs, and it's a lot more dystopian. So it was like a heavier read for me. So but still very good. But like I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't, like, maybe not your first. Maybe not
it's
your
like
first.
If you read The Space Between Worlds and you want more, and you're like,
yes,
more of this.
exactly. More of
I
this.
I think I can handle the sci-fi thing now. I'm less intimidated by that. I'm ready for Tochi Onyebuchi. What's the title of this particular book again?
This one is Goliath.
Goliath. Okay.
Yeah. So you're like, yeah. So it's like, I know that it didn't get as much buzz from what I saw as Riot Baby. Like, I had heard so much about that one, which I have not read yet. But I just know, like, so much stuff. And yeah, but Goliath, because it's still the ideas of other worlds, about privilege, about, class and race. And so the same themes.
Right.
But yeah, it's like people, the rich people who like left the earth to live other places are now trying to come back to earth to gentrify earth, and like maybe displace the people who had been staying there. So it's just like this, bigger extreme of potentially what we're going through. And I think especially reading it like after, I know we're still dealing with COVID, so I don't want to minimize that. But
after the lockdowns and
after the lockdowns, where we were like, we don't even know what this is, right? Like, can we go outside and breathe? Like we just this really significant fear where we don't know what to do. I could see like him being inspired to write this around that time. Yeah.
All right. 2 great recommendations from Arionne Nettles. Let's talk about your book. And
okay.
Again, the title is We Are the Culture, Black Chicago's Influence on Everything. When did you first have the idea that you were working on a book?
Yeah, so actually around like December 2019. So I remember because it was my first, I guess, Christmas winter break as an academic. And, as journalists, we don't get breaks. And so, technically as an academic, you don't really get a break either. Like those breaks, you should be doing this. Like, you should be figuring out what your book is going to be or whatever, right? Like, you get those breaks because you're supposed to be like working on books and like peer-reviewed articles and stuff like that. Like, you should be doing that type of stuff. But, when you're in a newsroom, you don't even have space to think about that. You're still working.
You're in a break from teaching where there are no immediate demands.
You're in a break from teaching. Yeah. And so that was my first time having a break from daily demands of things. And so I'm like, okay, I know I need to do a book. Like that's pretty much what you do as an academic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the first reason. And I was like, if this is gonna be my first book, I need to write what I know. I don't need to write, I don't want to dive into something that doesn't feel authentic to me. I want to write what I know. And what do I know? And I was like, I really know arts and culture, and I know Black Chicago. And this is what I've been reporting on for the last however many years. And this is what I know. And I wonder if I can take what I know and really like expand it. And I thought it would be easier, and it ended up being so difficult because I was like, yeah, it's like, I just do however many 3,000 word articles, and I'm thinking of it in like a journalism
and
mindset.
You've already written some of these
interview
articles, right? So
this person,
you can go back
this
to them and pull some quotes and things like that.
Yeah, and Exactly. I'm going to rewrite my reporting from this. I'm going to pull from this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Boom. I already know this. This is going to be so, this is the perfect thing. It was not anywhere near that easy. But I am still glad that I went with something that felt like really authentic and really like close to home.
I think, rather than try to summarize everything in the book, there are a lot of chapters, and basically most of the chapters are organized around some person or some institution's excellence in some kind of cultural expression that has an impact on Black culture, but also American culture more broadly as well. I thought maybe we could focus on just two of those. So one of the stories that I have heard about over the years, and obviously I saw Ebony and Jet in the newsstands as a kid, and moving to Chicago, you hear people talking about Johnson Publishing, and I've seen photos of the office, and there's the building on Michigan Avenue. But I didn't really know the story. It was just one of those things where you absorb it. And the thing I'd never heard of was the Negro Digest. And so will you just start there and tell us who John Johnson was and what the Negro Digest was, and maybe how that kind of then led to the further expressions of Johnson Publishing?
Yes. So the Negro Digest was actually John Johnson's first magazine. And I used to think that it was one of his later magazines because I thought, oh, well, maybe it just couldn't live in the shadows of like the other ones. But it was actually one of his first magazines. And it was created in the idea of kind of like Reader's Digest. So this was supposed to be like a Reader's Digest, but for a Black audience. And so to do this, he put his mother's furniture on credit. He really kind of was hustling. He laid it all on the line. He, was working for an insurance company at the time. He used the insurance company's list to try to get subscribers. He had friends go up to newsstands and say, hey, do you carry Negro Digest? To try to get them to carry it. But it was really, really his first foray into magazines. And it actually lasted a lot longer than I realized. It ended up changing its name because, the word Negro came out of favor when Black people, we started calling ourselves Black. What's the name? Black World. So it changed to Black World. And so when it came back in the 60s as Black World, around the time of Black Power, this was around the time of the Black Arts Movement, but I believe that it just was not, it couldn't really get as popular as like Jet and Ebony. However, I think that especially around this time, it became kind of like literary, you know? So you had Jet being kind of like this really interesting weekly that was really about like life, right? Like, you know, what's going on, a lot newsier than Ebony. You know, Ebony had news for sure, but like Jet was like, you know, if it happened in the world and it was about Black people, it was happening in Jet. And then you had Ebony with these beautiful large spreads of Black life, and then you had at that time Black World that kind of had more like these like literary compositions and poems. And
I'm imagining fewer photos and less art, right? It's more.
Yeah. At one point, it really garnered a lot of attention because Eleanor Roosevelt published a letter in it. So, you know, it kind of got people's attention with like famous people submitting writings.
I pulled one of your quotes from. So they had this feature, and I mean, this is kind of like. It's kind of amazing. The feature was called If I Were a Negro, I think, and it was white people.
Yes.
Basically, the magazine asking white people to imagine themselves as a Black person, sort of how they would feel about X or how they would feel about Y.
Yeah.
And I pulled the Eleanor Roosevelt quote where she says, "If I were a Negro today, I think I would have moments of great bitterness. It would be hard for me to sustain my faith in democracy and to build up a sense of goodwill towards men of other races." And then she goes on to basically say, but even still, Black people should fight and support the war, you know, in Germany too. But it's a pretty powerful, you know, I mean, you know, the language is old fashioned and it's maybe we would see it as a little bit cringy today, but asking white people to do this in the 1940s is, to me, that's actually a pretty radical thing to put in what's meant to be a newspaper for just like families and people to read too. I was kind of amazed when I saw that.
Yes. Because when I think of like Reader's Digest, I think of like
cookie recipes and, you know, like, here's a funny story from the time I went hunting with my uncles and he brought his favorite beans, you know. And I mean, it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And did Negro Digest, I've only been dipping into your book. Was that the spark that led to Ebony and Jet? Like, did that allow him to then start those two?
Yes. So it went to, so it was Negro Digest, then Jet, then Ebony.
Jet's the more newsier one, and Ebony. I think a lot about, like, with Ebony and Jet, the relationship between Time and Life in the like Time magazine and Life magazine.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, I would say that's very similar. So, you know, for example, when I'm researching, you know, stuff about civil rights, I'm probably looking through Jet. And it's weekly, so it's timely. But I think the beautiful thing is that JPC also had bureaus like everywhere. So I don't even know all the bureaus they had, but I know that they also had like people stationed overseas at some time. So they really were trying to capture everything. You know, we know in the news business, like something happens over a month, like that's old news now, you know? So like when they were covering the Emmett Till trials, like that was coming out in Jet because that's coming out every week. They're giving updates from maybe Till Mobley, his mother, about how she feels, quotes from her, like all these things.
They kept it in the news cycle. They kept the Emmett Till story in the news cycle.
They kept it in the news cycle.
Yeah. And, you know, you have this national and maybe, as you're saying, international reporting engine focused on matters that are particular to Black people, but of interest to everybody. And the mothership is the Johnson Publishing Building. Gorgeous offices, stunning in Chicago. So, and I've seen some of those photos, but will you just describe what those offices were like? I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yes. So the one thing that I would say is that really, really bright colors. I'll start over. The Johnson, so the latest Johnson Publishing Company building, the one that we drive past and see that big old logo, it opened up in the 70s. And so when you think about like 70s, you know, I Dream of Jeannie, like all of those like really bright colors, that is what it looked like on the inside. They hired amazing designers. Eunice Johnson, John Johnson's wife and business partner in a lot of this stuff. She was a fashionista, so it's gonna also show her fashion sense. So it's really, really bright colors, a lot of gold. There was also themes on every floor though. So every floor looked different. And this is when I get like kind of sad. So there were also parts of writing this book I got really sad because it's like, wow, I can never be a part of that. Like, you know, like I feel really sad. Like I literally was talking to somebody 2 weeks ago who worked at Johnson Publishing Company, and she was like, yeah, you know, and I was like, do y'all still have y'all barbecue, or y'all like they have like a barbecue or like a get together every summer? And she's like, yeah, we still do. And I'm like, I'm
like,
so
the
jealous.
Alumni, like all the people who worked there in the 70s and up until what, like the 90s,
they still
or
like
2000s?
Get together.
Yep.
Yeah, all of them. They still, up until like it was sold, they all get together.
I think they should invite you. I mean, you put it in your book, like.
Be like, can I just come and hang out, please? It's really, I mean, to be fair, I would probably be like the youngest person there because it's probably it was probably like, I think around the time, like it's probably like the people who were there until like around the time that John Johnson died and passed away. But yeah, so it's like, but they all hang out. So I know like all my mentors would be there hanging out, you know. Yeah, those are the things. So I hear stories like that, and it just makes me kind of sad that I can't see that anymore. Because even if we were to rebuild something as amazing as what John Johnson and Eunice Johnson built, probably wouldn't be a physical building, right? You know, like it would probably be different. Like the times are just so different now. But I think those are some of the reasons why I'm like, okay, we really have to capture as much as we possibly can, because these are just such cool stories.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking. I mean, part of it is just the way publishing has changed, right? And fragmentation, and also
Ebony is now under new leadership, under new ownership, and so I hope that the new ownership of Ebony does like great, amazing stuff. So, but like, even if they, you know, rebuild and create this new, you know, like you said, publishing is different. If they do this great, amazing new thing, it's probably not going to be like, it's not headquartered in Chicago, you know, like places, most media places now that are building, like they're not headquartering here anymore. Right?
Yeah, and everybody, like half the people are working on Zoom anyway, and everybody wants to live wherever.
So it wouldn't, it probably wouldn't be this beautiful like multi-floor building where everybody's just looking jazzy and beautiful in there and walking around, and
and it's also just like magazines don't have that kind of money anymore. You know, at least not news magazines. For sure, people don't have that kind of money. Maybe fashion magazines still do, and some other in sports and stuff like that. But like there was a time in America where you could put a magazine together that reported the news and did some cultural reporting and sell subscriptions and sell ads and make a lot of money doing it. And I mean, when I say a lot, I'm not talking about billionaires. I just mean like enough that you could pay your people well and have a nice office, which is unfortunately increasingly a thing of the past. It still exists, but most of the...
I was gonna say, I don't even know if like Hearst and Condé Nast are Hearst and Condé Nast anymore, you know, like...
Yeah.
You're not seeing the black cars. You're not seeing the huge budgets anymore, right? You know.
Or if they're doing it,
we're seeing more. We're seeing digital covers instead of real covers for a lot of magazines. So, you know, it's a different world.
If they're doing it, a lot of times it's because they have a portfolio of different titles, and the sort of like popular entertainment reporting, fashion reporting, that stuff is maybe subsidizing. You know, they're sort of like one boutique news magazine, you know, that they run. Well, New topic. I was delighted to see and surprised and delighted that one of the chapters in your book is the White Sox hat. And in fact, I saw that some of my reporting made its way into your book.
Yes.
And you did the right thing. You included a footnote and used a quote. So I was happy to see that. But this was something I learned. I mean, I always knew about the White Sox hat, growing up, because I can still remember seeing, one of Dr. Dre's videos with the Sox hat. And I can also remember I was a baseball fan. And I remember, I think it was 1990 when the White Sox did their big change to that black and white SOX logo, and it was a big deal, at the time. I was probably 13 or 14, and it looked so amazing.
I guess maybe because I live in Chicago, I did not really think about the White Sox hat growing up as a big deal. Because it was, of course, we all wore it, but I just, we're from Chicago and we're on the South Side. So it's like, why wouldn't we wear
well,
the
and
White
you were
Sox
also
hat?
probably like 5 or 6 when they developed the new look, so you were,
yes.
So you might not remember the way the White Sox looked in the early 1980s, which was a little bit different.
Yeah. So I didn't really remember that part at all. When I started thinking about like the inclusion of sports, to me, sports fashion was really important. And so the White Sox when they changed to the, the SOX, like the white on the black and that kind of, like Jesse, like you said, Jesse, that old English font in, what was that, 1990, 1991?
I think it was 1990, and they were going back,
Yeah.
You put this in the book, to a look that they had tried in the 1940s, kind of ripping off the New York Yankees with the black pinstripes, and they had carried that through the 50s, but then it went away for several years, like decades, and then they brought it back with exactly as you're saying.
Yeah. So I was like 5, so I just grew up with it, right? And so around this time, right, we're going into the 90s. We're going into gang culture in a way that doesn't really exist today. Anybody that grew up in a city like Chicago in the 90s, right, like, there were like literally certain colors you could not wear without being associated with a gang. And that's not necessarily something that we have to think about today. Yeah. And so with that, black and white, the Sox hat was something that was seen as neutral. It was something that you could wear and you're not seen as part of anything. So like if you are like,
anybody can wear black and white. You don't have to worry about it.
Anybody can wear black and white. So you don't have to worry about it. So if you are like the guys over in Compton, Dr. Dre and them, they don't have to worry about red or blue. You just have red.
Well, and I think, so at the time, if I'm remembering correctly too, the Raiders were still in Los Angeles, and their colors were black, white, and silver. And so when you had those West Coast rappers, NWA, that like black and white and silver, and maybe for the reasons you say, but also because they were all Raiders fans, it's almost like the White Sox look was just like I don't know that they were White Sox fans, but it was just the same colors, right? Like they just liked the look of it because it sort of fit into that aesthetic that already existed. I interviewed this guy, Rob Gallus, when I was working on this, and he was, I want to say, the marketing director for the White Sox during this period. And he told me, I don't know if this made it into that final story, but he told me they did a marketing study when they were looking at the new White Sox hat, and this marketing firm told them that West Coast gangster rap was going to be really big in the 1990s, and that the colors were black and silver, and that's part of the reason the White Sox made that change. Is they were reaching back into their own history, like we've said, but they also kind of thought, oh, if we take these colors, black and white, that's going to resonate with the West Coast rappers, which it did. I think in that chapter, you go on and talk about how other people then sort of reinterpolated that hat too, like Chance. And I don't know much about that story. So will you talk a little bit about sort of how that hat like then sort of traveled in the future after the 1990s? Yeah. I mean, I know that Chance did some kind of redesign at some point. And I'd heard about that, but I don't know much about how that came about.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, Chance did like a special. Chance did a special version one time that was offered. It was like, I don't think it was permanent, and I don't think it was like still available. But like it was just. I think it just showed that like the popularity of it, you know. So it's kind of like that design is still, to me, when they come out with special jerseys, it's still implemented in it, you know, like whenever they come out with like a unique one time only opportunity, like it's always a special thing. Like they'll change up everything, but they're not changing up that old English SOX design, right? Like how maybe other teams will kind of like play with their lettering and stuff. Like they're not really doing that. They're like sticking to that for sure.
We sort of have to work towards wrapping up, but was there anything you wanted to either quote, or I was curious if there's anything in the research of the book that like really astonished you, that amazed you when you learned about it, that you wanted to share? Or just a favorite moment that you wanna share from your research.
I think I just really, now looking back, can really appreciate like the late nights looking through the library's archives online. I think at the time I didn't realize how much unknown knowledge I was getting. Because I would be looking for a very specific thing, you know, like I'm trying to fact check one small fact, or I'm trying to get one thing. And the library's access, like, you know, was different, like, for example, than like the university's access on the archive. So it's like this very specific library, you know, and so it's just kind of like I fell back in love with the library. And I think that was just really important for me, like maybe just as a person, you know, just to remember that the library has always been there for me. And I think I like wrote that in there a lot, you know. I would be like, I'm just going to the library, you know.
You're kind of piecing together elements of your family's story too, you know, that, and we've talked about this before, and you did some reporting we worked on together about your grandparents and the Great Migration. But, you know, just reading the book, you kind of pepper it with these little moments, like things that your grandmother told you, memories of your grandfather. There's a moment where you're talking about being on the dance team at FAMU, you know, and dancing in a Chicago style. And part of it feels like part of what this book is doing is you're discovering and exploring aspects of your life that in a way you've sort of taken for granted because they're just the environment that you came up in, and recognizing like, oh, this is significant and it's very specific, and it's very specific to this place. And this place has had an influence, you know, beyond this place. And that's sort of feel like that's the journey that the book takes you on.
Absolutely. Because I think that like, I did hit a point, I think maybe like, I don't know, like maybe 7 years ago or so, where I think I was like really sad. And I don't want to say that like you get like, and maybe every Black American doesn't get to that point. I was always like really well educated about like slavery and our history and all this type of stuff. So like it's not like this wasn't new, but I think I hit a point where I was just like really sad about what was lost. Like the connections that were lost, the connections that could never be. You know, like I can never go to a country really and say, like, I can go to a country and admire, like, you know, like I love visiting, like, for example, South Africa my aunt lived in South Africa for decades. I have aunties there now, honorary aunties. So I love going to South Africa to see my chosen family. But like, that's not necessarily my history. That's not my culture, And so like DNA test won't tell me, And even if it did, right? Like, even if a DNA test told me that I was just one country, for example, which is not ever going to be the case for most of us. But let's say if it did, you're so removed that you can't just come, right? Like, that's not how culture works. Like, you just can't go back and like kind of reclaim something that you didn't grow up with.
You can't say like in 1767, my third great grandfather was a farmer in Ireland in this particular county or something like that, and lived in this house.
I can't do that.
Yeah. And it's because of enslavement interrupts that historical record.
Exactly. It interrupts that. And so it can feel like, you have like a hodgepodge of a story. And so I think that I had got to a point a while ago where I was just feeling like, wow, like I can never, like it's like I can't have it. Like I can never have that. And then I think that I started to realize, like, but I have such a rich culture here, right? Like, you have a culture with what you grew up with, right? Like, there are customs and things that are important and special that you have that maybe your parents had too, and that like your kids are gonna do. And so like these are also things to be celebrated. And so I think I really felt that for sure, like writing this book. And I think it was something that I really wanted people to feel when they were reading it, So it's kind of like the things I did, other people did. So if it's like, oh, I danced in a dance team, like so many of us dance in the exact same type of dance team, right? Like nobody else outside Chicago danced in that type of dance team, but so many of us did those same things, right? And so it's kind of like just these things that are just like quintessential Black Chicago things. And then somebody from Detroit might be like, oh, we kind of did it like that, but ours was slightly different, And then somebody else from, another place might be like, oh, yeah, we also did that, but we did it like kind of like this, right? And so it's kind of like there's just so many ways to also celebrate the culture that we do have because we've built up so much. And like that just deserves celebrating too.
I'm going to ask you this question, and we might have to cut it because it might not go anywhere, but I'm just curious. Because I've also traveled in Africa, and having done so, I definitely feel like I can sense a connection between African American culture and African culture, even though there was that disruption caused by slavery. Thinking about a lot of these examples you're talking about, formal dress in Africa is often very bright and colorful. Formal dress in European context is sort of often like dark gray, and I'm worried because you can kind of get into stereotypes here. And I think, though, a lot of these stories you're talking about are examples of Black people or Black institutions that are doing the thing with excellence and competence. We're going to make a magazine, we're going to do journalism, or we're going to play basketball and do 2 3-peats, or we're going to do classical music. We're going to do it excellently, but that when Black people do it in America, sometimes there is also an added element, a kind of flair. If you think about the FAMU marching band, we're not just playing the songs, but we're going to look a certain way while we do it. If you think about Michael Jordan playing basketball, he's not just really good at the game, but he looks iconic, when he's dunking. If you think about the Johnson publishing offices, they're not just functional magazine offices, they're fabulous. And there's this focus on fashion. And so I'm wondering if what I'm pointing at is a common thread in all of these things, and how you would maybe articulate that.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of commonalities, and I think that like genealogy is real in that aspect. And I think that sometimes we do it intentionally and sometimes we don't. Like we're talking about Curious City, right? We were doing a Curious City story about composer Florence Price, and she intentionally, would work on pulling in things like the cakewalk, or, certain things that were songs that would work with dances that were done during slavery, and they were connected also to Africa. And, I didn't talk about Catherine Dunham in the book, and I feel like that was like, if I had more space and I had more time, I feel like she deserved an entire chapter. But, dancer, famous choreographer, Catherine Dunham, she did the same thing, right? She intentionally, she was really like a dance anthropologist. She would go to all these places, study them, do field notes, and then incorporate those cultures into her dance very intentionally. But then there's a lot of times that it just happens unintentionally. Like, there's so many times where I've been in like South Africa and we're all just hanging out together, and we'll do some stuff, and then it's like, look, somebody will be like, look, we do the same thing, right? Like we naturally dance the same, we naturally vibe the same. Like there's something that like happens to you when the music hits. There's something that you're drawn to, when you look at the color. So like, in addition to maybe like a designer saying, oh, I'm gonna, pull in these bright colors from whatever, there's also like just us naturally saying, oh, I'm drawn to these bright colors. Like there's something about me that wants me to be bright like the sun. There's something that wants me to feel, like a certain way. And I do think that is like real. I think that's like real connection, and just even certain things like, my there's a way that like my parents or my mom or the women in my family always taught me to like dress and like look, and it's not necessarily for other people anymore, right? It's for me, right? It's like, how do you feel good? You're gonna feel really good walking into that room when your hair is done and when you look good and when you dress nice, right? Like, and when your makeup is on point. And so it's like, it's not like you're gonna look good, right? So it's like all of these things are like passed down sometimes intentionally, but sometimes it's just like, well, I saw her do it, and so there's just there's just a certain flair for sure that I think is real.
Cadillac Baby isn't gonna go to the stage of the show lounge in like, cut off shorts and a t-shirt.
I'm literally Cadillac Baby's granddaughter. Like I'm not gonna be anywhere near a stage without looking good. And
even just like the last few weeks, like, I've seen these images of Dawn Staley, former University of Virginia alumna. Dawn Staley, thank you very much. Coaching from the sideline, wearing this just wonderfully like waist cut jacket with a half collar and just looking absolutely fabulous. And it's like all basketball coaches dress up, but she's
Yeah.
There's an added layer there. And seeing a video of her during practice, and she's leading some drills, and then she's just putting a little bit of a dance move into it too. And I think it's wonderful, and I think it's something there. I mean, I've heard this talk. I've heard the phrase "the deep structure of African culture," and the way in which some cultural traditions can go back a long time and can be with us even if we're not necessarily consciously aware of them, whatever it might be. And I just noticed that thread in your book is that a lot of these people aren't just doing the thing competently, they're also doing it with style.
Yeah.
Arionne, I'm really excited about this book, and I've only had about a few days with it, so I'm looking forward to diving in more. Will you just, is there a favorite place, if somebody who hears the interview and they want to buy a copy, is there a favorite place where they should go to buy a copy?
They can go get it anywhere, and I linked out to all the places, some of the main places they can get it, like bookshop.org if they want to find their local place. If they're an Amazon person and they prefer that, because quiet as it kept, you do still need people to buy from Amazon, because that's, if you can't leave reviews on Amazon if you don't buy from Amazon.
Right. And you need that ranking. That ranking
helps you. It helps in Google. It helps all those places. And so I do link out to those places at Arionne, ARIONNE.com/book. But they can really buy it from wherever, because I'm always like, if you got some points here, maybe you got free shipping here, it's totally fine. But yeah.
Well, this was really, really fun. Is there anything else that you really wanted to talk about the book, or anything that we didn't get to?
No. I think the only thing that I would say is that I just hope that people walk away feeling like they feel really proud of wherever they are from.
Can you say a little more about that? I feel like this book's going to do very well in Chicago, because if there's one thing Chicagoans love, it's when people say Chicago is really, really important to the culture and it's been overlooked. Yes. And everybody in Chicago is just ready to read that book. But talk more about why people should be proud. Let's say if somebody is not from Chicago, why should they be proud of where they're from?
Yeah, because I think that I talk about all this stuff that I feel like we have done, but wherever you are and wherever you're from, I'm sure that you have done great stuff too.
There are stories and there are connections.
There are stories and there are connections that you should be proud of. And so I think that I did this book to make Chicago proud, but I think that, I hope that people are inspired, and that when they're listening, they're thinking about the things that make them proud too.
All right. Well, Arionne, thanks for joining us on Upper Middlebrow. Good luck with the book. It's always great to see you.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the creators and producers. Thanks to Arionne Nettles for joining me. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us at uppermiddlebrow.com. And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Check them out, get in touch if you want to talk about how we can help you with your project, big or small.